welcome to the very first episode of the Interconnectedness of Things, as we dive into the exciting world of tech and its profound impact on various industries and our personal lives. I'm Emily. I'm the head of marketing at QFlow Systems.
Hi, I'm Dr. Andrew Hutson. I hold my PhD from the Missouri Institute of Informatics. I've done research into clinical decision making as well as data visualizations. I am thrilled to start this podcast with Emily as we explore how AI will affect our lives in ways we can't even imagine. We both work for QFlow Systems, and we make document management, knowledge management, and workflow automation tools for use in all industries, and a special emphasis on federal government and healthcare.
And what a brilliant segue that is. We're talking about government today, and should government agencies use AI?
I mean, it's a big question that's coming up right now of not even just for government, but for anybody. Should this be something we use? What are the guardrails that should be put in place? Is government and Congress even prepared to put regulations around here? You probably read the news articles of big companies like Apple asking for some type of guidance and regulation for the use of AI to help protect not only corporate interests, but also individual privacy and security concerns. Have you ever heard of the U.S. Government Accountability Office?
I've heard of the name floating around, but for our listeners out there, how about you explain that?
Oh man, great answer. I hadn't heard of them before very recently, but these guys is a government agency. You can go to the website if you want, gao.gov, and they've attempted to put a framework around artificial intelligence, specifically around accountability. The four pillars of their framework are data, governments, governance, monitoring, and performance. The interesting thing here is it didn't say in those four pillars reliability, which I often challenge on AI, is I want to understand how can I, as a user, rely on the outputs of the AI. I mean, is this just guessing? Should I just assume that it's going to have my best interest at heart because of its soul? Well, probably
And
not.
you
It's probably
definitely want your government who would need to have accurate data.
oh, for
And
sure, right?
so I've used ChatGPT before,
Yeah.
and ChatGPT has gotten wild over the last year or so. And so I would be horrified to learn that the federal government was using ChatGPT.
Especially for like
So,
big decisions, right? So, and
yes.
just to be clear, when you're saying it's gotten wild, there's a specific term called hallucinations
Mm,
of when you ask a question of a generative AI model and it gives you back something that's just completely inaccurate. And the classic example is someone asking Google Gemini, how do I make my pizza stickier? And it suggested Elmer's glue. And obviously, I don't think it's a great pizza topping, but man, it was sticky and it was how you make something stickier. So why wouldn't that work? But it's because the hallucination. And
yep.
that can be subtle, where you don't even realize that it's the incorrect thing because you don't have the background and knowledge to know that. And that so that could that's where the danger could come in. It's not always going to be obvious and in front of your face.
Yeah. And
Uh,
that seems like a slippery slope too.
oh
Um,
yeah, for sure. So that's a problem that can come up as these things would reinforce the wrong answers, and then we would start to be convinced that the wrong thing is the right thing. You can even see this like in human interactions too, when you say the a less than truthful anecdote, and then it starts to spiral and then get out of control. We can see the same thing happening with us humans.
mhm.
Uh, to dive in a little bit more about how I think they're going to approach the reliability using this framework is it kind of centers on their monitoring pillar, where they say they want to ensure reliability and relevance over time. And the only way to do that is through continuous performance evaluation and assessing the sustainment and expanded use of the data is building out and relating that model. So having that pillar is really important. The thing that it doesn't say explicitly that we've certainly discussed in our backdoor meetings is how do we get the context of what we know how to do, the
Mm-hmm.
context of the rules by which we know we operate for our business, or the procedures for my financial institution that would want to make decisions on investments, or the healthcare industry that would want to find the best intervention for a diagnosis. All these things we as humans have developed over time in a framework in our minds through trial and error, through education. And as a result, we have a portion of folks that have specialized. If you think about the doctor who specialized in ontology, that's exactly oncology, excuse me. That's exactly what you'd want if you get cancer, someone who has studied and understands how that works so you can get the best recommendation. The same is true for AI. And why that's true is there's new ways of interconnecting pieces of information that have started out in the social media realm, but now have come in to help out with these AI models to say, me as a human have built out the meaningful relationships between pieces of information. And now I can connect that to a pre-trained model to increase the likelihood that what is produced from the model is in line with what objective truths I have developed inside of my own knowledge graph or a
Mm.
graph database. So that's kind of cool to think about. And the technology has not been called out explicitly yet on the GAO's website. But there is a concerted effort at least in the U.S. federal government, to put uh, some type of structure in place that this gets our attention. And so even earlier, just this year, in March 28, 2024, the AI.gov is the place to go find out about the advancing governance, innovation, and risk management for AI at agencies across the federal government. And they've
Mm.
also started to name chief AI officers, a new role that we haven't seen before, that's trying to pair the data side, because these folks typically started as a chief data officer, with the use and accountability of AI models as they enter into the day-to-day practice of our federal agencies. And I found out a kind of a cool fact. How many planned or current artificial intelligence use cases are in existence right now in federal government?
Well, that was going to be my next question is, so you're telling me that there are federal agencies right now using AI, and there are multiple, apparently. I'm
That's a
gonna,
great deductive reasoning there. Absolutely. So the fact that I asked the question current and planned insinuates that there may be something current happening
Mhm.
at the federal government. So the count right now, according to GAO.gov, is 20 of 23 agencies have self-reported about 1,200 current and planned artificial intelligence use cases.
Interesting.
Right now, there's so many of them. Now, here's another bit of interesting trivia, uh, and maybe you can take a guess. What do you think the number one agency is for AI use cases?
My mind went to cybersecurity first for some
Mm.
reason. Um, warm, warmer,
I don't
cybersecurity.
think there's a cybersecurity agency, but I do like where your head's at on that.
Is it Homeland Security?
Great guess. DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, is about midway through. They've identified 21 use cases. The biggest by far, NASA, with 390 reported use cases.
That makes sense.
seconded by the Department of Commerce for these AI model use cases. And again, these are either planned or current. Of that total 1,200, there's 520, maybe less, planned that's coming up. And maybe 228 are in total in production. Now, there's another subset that says their use is not provided, probably from security reasons. We
Hmm.
can't tell you if we're using it, which makes sense, right? Across the board with these agencies. But we can see that the question that you started the conversation with of should government use these is very relevant because they already are.
Hmm.
And I think to ask that question, there may be an assumption that we haven't said out loud is when we say should they use AI, were we thinking that the use of AI is a relatively new occurrence? And I think some
Right.
people think it is.
Hmm.
And that was probably largely influenced by the rapid explosive growth of ChatGPT into the zeitgeist of our concepts of technology. Um,
Yeah, when it hit the mainstream.
yeah, it hit like everybody knew it. And then it was made in a way that was approachable that others felt like they could use it. They didn't understand it, maybe, but they knew they could probably get some value from it. And so now
Yeah.
the question is bringing that to the forefront of, well, should that be in use by a government agency? And I think it's important to call out that generative AI has been at least 10 years in the making. ChatGPT didn't start recently. They've been working since about 2012 to go pull data, train, reinforce. And I think some folks maybe inflate or conflate the SaaS idea with AI companies. And they're
Okay.
very different because the time it takes up front to do the research, science, model tuning is very time consuming and resource intensive. Some of the models that you can see out there today, I think recently Meta just dropped Llama 3.1, which had 405 billion parameters. It likely cost 60 to 80 million dollars in just compute cost to generate. That knowledge of how expensive it is to build these things is why it's very hard for other companies just to decide to get into the AI model game. And most of what we're going to see is how do we leverage the pre-built models.
Right. And that makes me think of data privacy, and that's a huge issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a lot of where people are worried about generative AI being used in government agencies. And
Yeah.
so that's probably where the chief AI officers are going to come into play. And so whenever you're talking about these different models, they've largely been, correct me if I'm wrong, but the data has been captured from public information.
That's exactly right. There could be some proprietary stuff that's put in there depending on who owns it. For example, Slack was just in the news recently that Salesforce, because they bought Slack a couple of years ago, um, is going to use the data in Slack to help train a model,
Hmm.
right? So sometimes it could be proprietary, like we're the only ones that have that set. X is certainly doing that, formerly Twitter. There's a new, I think it's called Grok.ai or X.ai. I'm not, can't tell which one it is, but those would be examples of using proprietary data to inform a model. But by and large, most of the training set has been publicly accessible data. In fact, there's a thing called The Pile, which has been in the news recently, that was curated by a non for profit company that was funded by for profit companies to pull the data, and then they could use the pool of this data to then train models. And some YouTube creators are upset because their videos are being used and added to the pile. We should
Hmm.
probably get some explosive sound effects with that. The pile
The
to,
pile.
yeah, to train all their models.
Hmm.
Um, but when we talk about the privacy component, the the generation of the models will get better over time because of the inclusion of publicly accessible data. But what can't happen is the context of your business or you yourself. The only way right now, if you want to use those third party models, is either accept their terms and send your data to them, or find a way to leverage those models behind a wall, if you will, that only you can access. So you can leverage the models as a baseline and
Mm-hmm.
then add your own data on top of it. That can seem difficult for folks, but it's a lot cheaper than trying to build the model from scratch yourself. So what we're seeing is more and more open source models, and then folks not quite understanding where to take that next step. And the next step comes into what we referenced before, which is knowledge graphs that
Mm-hmm.
have your specific knowledge combined with a local version of the models that you are then reinforcing and building on top of. That to me is what the next phase is of AI as they get better and better foundational models, we'll say. I think Apple, when they were talking about artificial intelligence or Apple intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
were grouping things like ChatGPT into world knowledge, so generally available, but your specificness
Mm-hmm.
within that was kept private. And I think that's what companies are going to move towards as well as
Yes.
government agencies.
Yes. And I think that that's an important component too, um, because my mind's going like it's not surprising that NASA is using AI the most. Um, but I'm thinking of those smaller agencies,
Mm-hmm.
um, like the USDA
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
GSA or any of these smaller agencies, and how might they even use AI? Like what's a more
Yeah,
practical
totally,
use?
totally speculative now, right? But let's take the Department of Agriculture, USDA, as an example. Okay,
Mhm.
so they are trying to coordinate the producers of America, whether that be livestock or agricultural activities or any of the ancillary work that's done for those ranches and farms, right? Uh, the power that's needed uh, and the next level for the USDA is being able to determine region specific anomalies that require some type of intervention, or data collection for soil composition, better meteorological models now that global warming is causing less predictive behavior,
Mhm.
the efficacy of different agricultural approaches. So rather than plowing a field now, you would leave the field alone and use a different tool to get the seeds in the ground to prevent the topsoil from blowing away because of big storms, as an example. These approaches are very much aided when a knowledge graph can be built to give producers better insight, access, and prediction, if not prescription, on what to go do with their particular farm. Some use cases could be down to, hey, natural language question to the USDA to figure out what subsidies I might be eligible for in my specific region. Well, today that's not super available and it might take a lot of looking into. But if you can create that knowledge graph and tie it into a large language model so you can use human questions to interrogate it,
Mhm.
then perhaps that becomes a lot faster and easier for producers so then they can get the support that's required and the system becomes more efficient. All of this is speculative, but you can
Sure.
certainly see the power of knowledge graphs, private LLMs, and geographical information system combining together to create something really powerful for producers.
Yeah, and this is data that they're likely already gathering. It's just connecting those dots and being
That's
able
right. I
to
mean,
analyze that data easily.
And that's an effort that I think everyone has been on for at least 3 decades.
Mm,
How do I capture data? How do I organize it in a way that I can then take advantage of it?
hmm
And what we're finding is that's hard. From an actual practice standpoint, it's hard to have the discipline to get your data right, to have it be reliable, to have it calculated as you expect. I mean, you have a whole department at USDA on statistics that are just
hmm
there to collect self-reported forms from producers to try to come up with some type of trending that can happen. And it's manual, sometimes it's in paper, and it's still a bit difficult and dated.
hmm
Uh, Now we're going to go ask the introduction to AI models into that. That could
Yes.
be really hard and seemingly daunting. So
Yeah.
the easier we can make that approach, the easier that it becomes second nature to populate a knowledge graph with the connected relationships between bits of information, both direct and indirect, mind you, not just direct relationships, the better off everyone's going to be on the power of decision making that they get. It's another big tipping point in going from an information phase to an intelligence phase and our use of data, not only from a collection standpoint, but from an execution standpoint.
And that wraps up another episode of the Interconnectedness of Things. Remember, technology is more than just tools, it's the thread that connects us all. If you found value in our discussion, be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share the podcast with others who are just as passionate about tech and innovation as you are. Also, if you're interested in learning more about QFlow, visit us at qflow.com. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the interconnectedness of things. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.